So, as we kick off another episode, I'm really excited to be able to introduce you to Dr. Melissa. She's a trauma expert and master healer who helps soul driven leaders solve their unsolvable problems. She helps brilliant creative empaths identify the hidden narcissists' impact and how they're impacting their lives, their identity, and just rise above, right? The trauma and the chaos to become, I know a word we're going to be talking about, which is anti-fragile. So, Dr. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
So, I am really excited. I know we've got a lot to cover in a really short period of time. And I think we might, as we mentioned, need to do some regular communication, right? Because there's just so much to unpack. But the intention for today is for us to be able to tee up a couple practical things that women that are listening could be thinking about or implementing as they may be navigating through not only the divorce process, but navigating through somebody who is narcissistic and their impact on the divorce process. So let's kick this off. So first of all, I want to tee this up by saying we don't hate men. So there's 4 ways, and I know we're going to be talking about 4 ways that women can get the narcissist that they're probably going through the divorce process with to do what they want. And so why don't we kick off there? Tell us, what is the first thing that women can do?
This is awesome. And the caveat I would offer first, depending on where people are at in their healing journey when they're listening, is if they want to get the narcissist to do what they want, to hurt them the way that they were hurt, to, sort of get them back, it will backfire. If they want to manipulate the narcissist into taking them back, it will backfire. If they want to get the narcissist to do what they want, to change and be the person that they wish that they were, that's also going to backfire. So those 3 things are out. And if anyone else is still listening, this is what where we need to be. So the first step is to examine your motives, and you want to make sure that your motives are really clean, that what it is that you want is best for not only yourself, but for your kids, if you have kids involved, for the narcissists themselves too. This is not about sticking it to them. It's about creating a win-win-win that is best for everyone under the circumstances. And it's really common when someone's been hurt or victimized to have mixed feelings about it, in the same way that we do about lots of things, right? Like I could totally want to get in great shape, but I could also really want to eat a brownie. And so, maybe 80% of me really wants to get in great shape and 20% wants that brownie. Right. So it's not like we're expecting them to be 100% on board, but if someone was wanting to create a financial solution or a custody solution, and 95% of them just really wants what's best for everyone that's involved, and 5% of them really just wants to stick it to the narcissist, that's still a decent primary motive. 95% of it's fine. They can do healing on that other 5%. That will serve them well. But really looking at the motive for why you want this in the first place is huge. Because if people skip that step, everything else backfires.
I think there's a lot here. And one of the things that I'm thinking about with this is, okay, there's this other dynamic as people are going through this process, and that's, the court system. And the fact that, while I think women tend to genuinely, most women that I'm working with, right, they do have a genuine motive. Like they really do want what's best, right? Now, they probably can move the needle to get closer to, that higher percentage of really having good intentions and motives. But, how do we deal with that when there is this other kind of aspect that is part of the situation and that's impacting, them? Like, I'll give you an example. There's been plenty of my clients who have wanted to share their voice, right? And yet the court system isn't listening. And it seems as though they are re-victimizing, right, those individuals, or not listening or not fully understanding the scope of what's going on and all the manipulation and control. Before we leave this kind of motives piece, can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's such a common problem. It's so frustrating. I think I've actually written 13 articles on like this very thing, and how to recognize the difference between the narcissist and the victim, because the court systems generally can't. The attorneys aren't good at it. The guardians ad litem are not good at it. Therapists are not good at it. And that becomes really frustrating for the victim, who's continuing to be victimized by the system that is supposedly trying to help them. The single best thing people in that situation can do is to get going on their healing, so they can really tone down a lot of the emotions, because the emotions of anger or being really upset or really frustrated, unfortunately, while everyone is completely entitled to them and really justified in having them, they unfortunately do great damage in the court system and with all of those other people. The narcissist will very quickly spin that to make the woman or the man experiencing those emotions be the crazy one, or the one who's just over the top, and everyone stops listening. So it's unfortunately the least effective way to communicate from that point of, being really in the emotions of the whole thing, being able to become emotionally regulated and really calm about it, is just much more effective.
So what I hear you saying, right, is, hey, we can control one person in this situation, right? And that's us.
Right.
And, what can we be doing to make sure that our motives are pure? And what can we be doing to make sure that we're doing the healing that we need, throughout this process? Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important part of it, because I think, and also, hey, let's also not forget that women tend to also focus on, hey, they're very concerned about the other parties, but that also means that your motives have to be clear, what you want for you. Like, you got to take some time to sit in that, because it's easy to say, hey, I want what's best for my kids. I really don't want to upset, my soon-to-be ex, and I do really care about that person. And oh yeah, by the way, there's a third person in this whole dynamic, right? Closely held.
Oh, right. And a lot of times there too, even it's like the motive within the motive. You don't want to upset the ex. Well, is that because you're hoping that they come back? Or is that, what's the motive there? Because there's a whole element of behaviors that are really common to victims of abusive behavior, things like people pleasing, or not setting defined boundaries, or these kind of things that show up in those, court engagements, I guess, in the same way. And we want to be really clear about, what do they actually want, and what's their motive? And is it that they're giving away too much because they think they don't deserve anything? Being really conscious and present with those kind of thoughts and beliefs is hugely important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the first one of the 4 ways, right, is examine the motives of our motives, right? Is mainly where that focus is, right?
Exactly.
And then the second one, let's talk about the second one.
Yeah. So the second one is really being consciously aware of what this narcissist or toxic person's behavior patterns are. Are they someone who, loves to be seen as, someone who is very engaging? Are they someone who loves to be, validated? Or are they someone who plays the victim? The big thing to remember is that narcissists are motivated by 2 things, and 2 things really only. The first is narcissistic supply, which can come in good or bad forms. And the other one is preserving their persona. They have a persona that they have put on. It may have been there for most of their entire life, but it's like they're method actors and they're playing a role. And that persona is hugely important. So when we look at like how they prefer to get supply, do they like people to respect them? Do they like people to admire them? Do they want someone who validates how they're feeling? Do they get supply by devaluing you? Do they get supply by complaining about you to their flying monkeys? Oh, woe is me. She's so horrible. You know, how do they get supply? And then what's their persona? What's the image that they show the world? Are they someone who has to be in charge and in control of every situation? Are they someone who needs something to be their idea before they do it? You know, like where you've suggested something 10,000 times and then they suggest it a week later as if it was their idea. Right?
It's interesting when we start to see, and I know you and I talked briefly about this whole persona thing, and I was like, oh, this is so fascinating, right? Because I think for those of us that are in this space, it's, you know, it's the awareness of being able to recognize these things. And then of course, having the experts that can help, you know, navigate through those pieces. But I had a client, we were in the middle of mediation, and I happened to be there, right? So I was able to be present, and we were caucusing. So my client and her attorney and I were in one room, and then her soon-to-be ex and his attorney were in the other. And then the mediator kind of bops back and forth between the two rooms. Mediator comes in and says, oh, hey, I just want to let you know that, I mean, he showed me his apartment that he's living in. He like has no furniture. Like he does this whole persona of like, I'm totally poor. I have no money. You know, I'm just sacrificing everything for whatever. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, this is unbelievable to me, right? Like he basically got out photos because he really wanted the mediator to be able to understand that he was just really the victim here.
Right. And it's amazing how, you know, people often think of narcissists as being like the flashy, wealthy, successful, full of themselves, but covert narcissists, which are sort of my area of expertise, they're the subtle or the sneaky ones that very often are the victim or the hero. In every story, they are a victim or a hero, but when they do it well, they're both. So it'll be things like, you know, I didn't get the promotion because I didn't get the job because I was late for my interview because I was helping this blind woman across the street. So they're the victim who was like unjustly turned down for the job because they were being heroic. And that kind of pattern shows up again and again. It's so interesting when you start to listen to them and when you can see it objectively and you know, this is how they're getting supply, or this is the persona that they want the world to see. In your example, that gentleman wanted the mediator to think he was, you know, completely poor and going without and self-sacrificing and everything, because that was part of the persona that he wanted to portray. And they will do anything to preserve that persona. I mean, it's like a fight to the death. To preserve that persona.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, I think these are the kinds of things, right, that I'm so glad that we can have a candid conversation, because I know as women are listening, they're like, oh my goodness. And they're probably having a recollection of things in their own life that they're like, oh, this is totally what's happening. Like, you know, so I think that's important. One of the other things that I wrote down was, you know, consider the previous patterns. And I want to just touch on that for just a minute, because I think it's so important. So within my current program that I have for clients that are contemplating and going through divorce, one of the things that I will often say to them is, you know what, when we're looking at which pathway do you go down for divorce, do you do mediation? Do you do litigation? Do you do collaborative? I said, one of the things that you need to be looking at and be honest and brutally honest with yourself is, what are the patterns? Because I think as women, when we get into that space and the spouse says, well, we should do mediation, it's cheaper, I want it to be amicable, and there's this like false sense of security and well-being, right, in these situations where women are like, okay, yeah, let's do mediation, right? But if we're truly brutally honest with ourselves, we know that's not a good idea.
Right.
We know there's already an imbalance of power. We know what they're all about, and we see 10, 15, 20 plus years worth of patterns. I think we have to be realistic to say it's not going to change now that I'm going through divorce. Not suddenly are things going to be amicable and no conflict and super cooperative and all that. It's just, that's not the reality. Now, there's certainly some people that might work for, but when the audience that you and I are talking to, and I had a client point that out to me. She said, Rhonda, that exercise was really helpful. I mean, it was painfully helpful, right? Because I did have to be honest with myself. And you're right. I don't think that's a good path for me, going down the mediation path, right? Where you don't have an advocate. So it's super practical, and again, we as women want to believe the best in people. I believe that's part of what makes us so amazing. Right? We want to believe the best. We want to be hopeful. We want to, believe that people are going to change and all of that. That's all good stuff. But in these types of situations, it becomes extra challenging.
Absolutely. And part of that's the cognitive dissonance that comes with this type of abuse. It's like they showed you a persona of the dream person, and that's who you fell in love with. But the reality is someone way over here that is no one like that dream person, that persona, but they can go in and out, back and forth so quickly, that it's so common with like the false apology, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. Please take me back kind of thing. This is after they've broken up with someone for the, 17th time in the week or whatever. And in that moment, they look like that person that they fell in love with, but they're not. So looking at the pattern is hugely important. Like if this is the nth time that you're having this conversation, or that you had conversations like that in the past, it's not going to be resolved because they're saying in that moment that they want to do that now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So examine the motives, consider previous patterns, which I think is very, very important. You touched a little bit on the narcissistic supply, how they get their supply. Do we want to expand on that? Anything else that you want to share in that regard?
Yeah, so narcissists, and that's really great because it leads into number 3. Narcissists get supply in one of two main ways. In the psychology world, they have the name of ingratiation and aggression, which just sound crazy, but ingratiation basically is like admiration, respect, validation, love, attention, positive or negative. The aggression are the devaluation kind of things. So those are going to be ways that they exert power and control over you by putting you down, sabotage, undermining your efforts, lying, shifting blame to you for their actions. How many people have had an experience where they sit down to talk to their spouse about something like serious that's gone on that they've done, and they end up walking away apologizing themselves for something totally different and feeling badly with no resolution of the original issue. There's a whole list of these tactics and behaviors that they use, and some of them get a lot of supply from that. And they don't even care if those covert narcissists that I talked about, they can sabotage you without you even knowing that they did it. Like they don't even need the credit to get the supply from it. Doing some crazy things like, maybe hiding your slippers. So you're running around the house when you get home from work trying to find your slippers, and they're just getting supply about the fact that they have power and control over you because your slippers are not by the side of the bed where you left them. Like they seem so small and odd, but there's a reason it's called death by 1,000 paper cuts. They're these really strange things that give them supply. And so the third strategy of the 4 is to give them narcissistic supply. And it's important to understand really what that is. So most people are able to supply themselves with what they need to regulate their own self-esteem, to regulate their own emotions. Narcissists are not capable of doing that. They're not capable of supplying themselves. They're not capable of regulating their self-esteem or their emotions. They rely on other people for that. So if they don't get supply, and they may be getting supply from lots and lots of people, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're cheating, because there are certain subsets of narcissists that really don't cheat. That's a common way to get supply from someone else, but they may be getting supply by complaining about you to 40 people and getting supply from them. Oh, you poor dear, you're living in that apartment with no furniture because she won't give you any money, right? And they're getting a ton of supply from that. So they are unable to regulate their own self-esteem, regulate their emotions when their supply level gets low and their self-esteem gets low. That's when they become completely emotionally dysregulated. They become erratic. This is when you see like a full-blown narcissistic injury, narcissistic rage, narcissistic collapse. They do destructive things. There are, I can't tell you how many stories there are of people who, were concerned that their significant other was going to break up with them. So they like break their ankle on purpose so that they can't have to move out right now. They can, have to stick around, or getting in car accidents or big erratic things, because that drive for supply is so huge. They have to have it. And if they're afraid that their primary source is leaving and they don't have tons of backup sources, they will do whatever they have to keep that supply. So when we talk about, when we look at it from that end, this would be like, trying to reason with a toddler who hasn't had their nap. It's not, giving
totally
giving them narcissistic supply for the purposes of regulating their self-esteem and their emotions so you can have a constructive conversation is not any more manipulative than telling your teenager to get a good night's sleep before they take the ACT. It just puts them at their best so they can make their best decisions for themselves and for everyone concerned. And so once you've examined that pattern of how they get their supply and who that persona is, it becomes much easier to give them supply. I never suggest anyone ever allow themselves to be devalued for the purpose of supply. So, I would not ever suggest someone allow, a narcissist to be verbally abusive to give them supply. But there are a lot of other ways to do it, saying, why don't you do such and such? The kids always enjoy spending time with you doing that, if they're part of their persona as being a good father. Or, I'm interested in your thoughts about how we split up this investment. You always were good with the money. These kind of things that are, instead of the common pattern is people will try to, because they're angry, right? And rightfully angry, they'll try to take them down instead. They insult that persona. They insult or try to take down the person that the narcissist thinks that they are. And it has the opposite effect. It will have devastating consequences in terms of the result of any kind of negotiation.
So what about for the people that shut down? You know what I mean? Like, I know that that's probably from the women that I've talked to, my clients and stuff like that. Like, there's a shutdown mode. Like, they just basically don't engage at all. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, and that's great, because depending on the type of relationship, whether there's kids involved, all kinds of factors, it's really often recommended to go no contact or to have as little contact as possible. So they may not be the ones that are even providing the supply. It may be the other attorney in negotiation who says, hey, look, she doesn't want you to lose your opportunity to, take this job in this other city. How can we work this out so everyone's happy? Like where they're, instead of, the attorneys so often want to be like so aggressive, and they just want to like tell the other person off because they think if they seem more powerful, the other person will just comply. But with a narcissist, they'll do the opposite. So for the people that you're talking about, where the victim, the one who has been victimized, is pretty shut down, they may not even be the one providing the supply. They just might be the one providing the information to their attorney, to their advocates, to the mediator, to whoever's involved.
I can't help but think of, and this is why that I'm so glad that you and I connected, and it's like we were literally in each other's backyards. I'm like, oh my gosh, like how, so we have actually met in person, which I don't always get the opportunity to do with some of my podcast guests. And I know there's a lot of stuff that you and I are going to be working on, together. But I think at the end of the day, there is a huge need for those of us who are working in this space to understand this. And I think, it's hard because a lot of times people will go to interview an attorney and they'll say, hey, have you, worked with a narcissist and, blah, blah, blah. And the attorneys will say, oh yeah, all the time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they understand how to negotiate with them, how to close the gap, how to come to resolution. I mean, there's one mediator that I've worked with, and I was mentioning this to you, who's on the East Coast that I've worked with. And she ends up, like when the mediation, people reach out to me and they're like, Rhonda, I'm done with mediation. It's not working, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, well, you have two choices. Either we figure out a way to continue mediation because you're about, a little over half done already with some stuff, or you decide you're going to bail and do litigation. And now you're probably at 25%, then you're going to be going backwards. You're going to be starting over on some things, and, then you're going to have to move forward. And I said, if we can find a mediator that understands how to help people be that voice, that negotiation, right, of the parties, we might be able to get this done doing mediation. But that is not something that I recommend unless I know the mediator has a track record of doing that and understands. So the mediator that we've worked with, she's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. She was married to a narcissist. She understands all of the aspects of this whole situation, and she'll do mediation as a caucus. So she'll meet with one party and she'll meet with the other party. The parties actually never meet together as a party of three, right? She's always meeting with the parties individually and understanding, okay, what were the past patterns? What are the motives? How do they get the supply? How can I speak to them that I think is going to, I know that they don't want to pay support. We just did a divorce together. I was behind the scenes helping with the financial stuff. But one of the things that she said to the soon-to-be ex was, I know that you don't want to pay support, but what if you were able to help contribute to the health insurance and, for the disability insurance and, some of these other things, or for the child-related expenses for some of the adult kids, because I know you don't want to do that, right? But would you be willing? She got him to do it because she knew what was important to him. Because, right? Like yes. Everybody else could not get through to this guy, right? But she knew how to speak the language. And that's why I've told my clients, like in this particular situation, because I know her history and I know the success she's had, I'm like, you have to trust that she knows what she's doing, because there's going to be times when it seems like, is she really doing what? No, her goal. And again, she's not taking husband out at the knees. What she's doing is she's actually trying to finally level the playing field and understands how to close the gap. And it's masterful. But without understanding the things that you're talking about, this is a nearly impossible task, in my opinion.
Absolutely. No, it absolutely is. That's very true.
Yeah, for sure. So, understanding how they get that supply and that persona. And I know you've got all kinds of articles and stuff around that so people can follow you and get caught up on some of those things. And we can include some of those links in the show notes for sure. But that's an important part of it. And making sure that we've got the experts in our network, right, in our inner circle that can help us become what you refer to as anti-fragile. And I do want to touch on that, and then we can maybe move on to number 4.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk to us a little bit about that. When I first read that, I was like, that's interesting. Tell me more.
I love the concept of antifragility in this context, because so often people strive to be resilient, which is far better than being stuck in victimhood. But resilient implies, you get knocked down, you get back up, you get knocked down, you get back up. You never really move forward. You just don't give up and stop trying. But Antifragile, you really get stronger. You become better, more powerful than you were before it happened. There's an element of not only learning about narcissists, but learning about yourself. So much so that I contend that the history of abuse can actually be leveraged as the springboard to creating wild success in all areas of your life. Because when you can unpack it all and break it down and reverse engineer, as I help people do all the time, reverse engineer the trauma bond, rewrite the subconscious scripts, the things that got them in this position where they feel like they don't deserve, or they don't have, or they're invisible, or they're not enough, or whatever, that the narcissist exploited in the first place, and by love bombing them, and then exploited in their devaluation to create that trauma bond. They can actually become, for lack of better words, better than they were before. I wrote one article that was like 16 things I would have never learned without my own history of narcissistic abuse. And by no means am I suggesting that people should be abused. That's obviously wrong. But there is a way, once that's happened, to leverage it in creating this anti-fragility that's just amazing, because it doesn't just transform the relationships. It transforms your health. It transforms your wealth. It transforms your impact on the world. It's incredible.
Yeah, I love that. And I think ultimately, right, that women that are listening, at the core, at the heart of what they're all about, they want to be, right, empowered. They want to be confident. They want to impact the world. They want to be, in a better place. I mean, I remember, and again, we all have our own kind of history and stories with this stuff, but I just remember, being a child, right, and having my dad, who was an alcoholic and had a lot of these types of traits, and there was certainly abuse that happened or whatever. And I remember being in college thinking, I don't want to be like this, right? I don't want to be like passive. I don't want to be avoiding conflict. I don't want to be, feeling like I don't have a lot of power in these types of situations because I don't know how to, show up and have constructive, healthy, assertive conversations. And so I remember what that felt like, and I didn't like it, right? But I didn't know how to get there.
Right. Most people don't in college.
Right? I don't know how to get there. And so I'm so grateful to what you're saying, because I do feel like if anybody can make a situation that was not good, that was not healthy, into something better, more powerful, wanting to impact, even if we could help one person, we as women would be like, yep, it was worth it because I helped somebody with this, right? Not that we wanted to go through it, not that it was right, but that we can use those experiences for impacting the greater good, right? And it is a big deal. So if women are listening and they're like, okay, yes, I'm in that spot. I want to show up being confident. I want to show up having assertive conversations. I want to have healthy boundaries. I don't want to be fragile. I want to be anti-fragile. Like, I want to be so solid that it doesn't matter what they do, right? I'm really in a good spot.
Right.
So, I think that that's obviously where you come in, which is the healing piece, as people are going through this journey, and where I come in on advocating on the financial side. But I know that the healing is certainly part of, this journey for them. Anything that you want to mention around the healing journey aspects before we kind of wrap up with the fourth one?
Yeah, I think one big thing that, if I could shout from the mountaintops so that everyone knew, is on the stages of healing. I break it down into 5 stages. The first is like awareness and education, even figuring out what's going on. The second is exiting the abusive relationship, which frequently requires a therapist or a lawyer to help with. The third is really changing your mindset around things, and frequently a therapist or a life coach help with that. And almost everyone, dare I say, everyone stops there and thinks that they're done. They think that that when they've gotten through that piece, that they're done with the healing, and then they're completely confused why they continue to attract new narcissists as potential romantic partners, as potential business partners, or that they choose to be in relationships with them as business partners, as coworkers or employees or friends or personal trainers or whatever. And they start going through this cycle of attracting in someone new, thinking they're really cool, being really excited about this relationship, whatever it is, that it's their new best friend, it's their personal trainer, it's whatever. And then realizing it's toxic and abusive, exiting the relationship with the skills that they learned from therapy, and then having more trauma to deal with. So, and unfortunately for almost everyone, this is exactly how it goes. So the fourth step is extracting the trauma. Mm-hmm. And there's an element of breaking the trauma bond, which is not just, everyone gets this one confused because they think that's just like not being over the person. It might not even be that person. They could be trauma bonded to a narcissistic parent or grandparent, or it could be a narcissistic characteristic of society or other things. That breaking that trauma bond, it does not necessarily mean that they're still attached to that person, because a lot of them are angry by then. They're like, well, I hate them, I don't want anything to do with them. I guarantee they're still trauma bonded, the vast majority of them. So that piece, and then, with the master energy healing piece that I do, extracting the trauma from their physical body, it's landed in their physical structure, which is why so many victims of abuse have migraines or irritable bowel or some chronic pain somewhere in their body, or heartburn, or a variety of things, fatigue, insomnia. It is from the trauma. That's essentially a messenger that's asking them to wake up and notice it so they can heal it. And then the fifth step is connecting really deeply to the truth of who they are, to connecting, the person that fears that they're not good enough, that needed that narcissist to tell them that they're amazing because inside they were really scared that they weren't good enough. That piece is not real. It's not them. It feels real, but that's not the truth of who they are. So this process of extracting the trauma and connecting to the truth of who they are is extraordinary in moving things forward, rewriting those subconscious scripts that were false, that were driving them to dim themselves down, to dim their light in their career, in their impact, in everything that they do in life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And when I think those are all such really great parts of it, right? Because again, it's a process. And I think a lot of times when people are in these types of situations, I was just talking to a client this morning who's like, I can't believe that I like found this person and whatever, and that I let this go for so long. And it's like, yeah, but these folks are masterful. They're masterful. Like, we can't be carrying around all the guilt and, shame and all the pieces of it, because they're masterful at it. They've convinced you and everybody else around them that they're whatever. Like, it's not just you, and then try to create that separation. And you see it. They're convincing everybody around them how great they are, and how, they're serving people, and they're giving, and they haven't only just, been influencing you. They're influencing everybody in their life. So I don't want women to feel like, they did something wrong. Right? I mean, I think it's easy to carry around that guilt and shame. And it's like, we can't do anything about that now. How do we get through this? How do we get through the process in the best way possible? Use this as a way to learn, grow, and heal, so that you come out of this stronger, that you're more equipped emotionally, spiritually, financially, physically than you have been before. And that is the best gift that I think any of us can give to ourselves and to our kids.
It's completely true. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I love this. I thank you so much for your willingness to be on the show today, sharing your expertise, your passion, your I know that where you're coming from in speaking to these comes from a very deep place of personal experience and healing. So I want to thank you for that. As we wrap up,
you want to do step 4.
Oh, yes. Step 4. Yes. And back to you. Step 4. Yes. And then I'm going to have you just give us your favorite quote or a wrap up word of encouragement. So yes, step 4.
Oh, wonderful. Step 4 is making what you want the narcissist or toxic person's obvious best choice. So, for example, if the narcissist is wanting, joint 50-50 placement, and they want your kids, your shared kids at their house on weekdays, pointing out to them like, oh, thank goodness, that's awesome, because it's so hard getting little Johnny out the door in the morning. I will finally get to work on time. He listens so much better to you, right? So you can, where they're like, oh, shoot, I didn't think about that. And so you're not going to say, right? You're not going to try to teach them or show them something by saying, you're going to have this challenge, because they're going to double down. If their persona is that they're the most amazing father, right? They're going to double down that this is not a challenge. This is whatever. But you're just pointing these things, these things out that maybe they haven't thought about. Or even in terms of, financial division of assets. They might have more tax implications if they were to do something this way. Or the example that you gave of, instead of providing support, can you pay for these other things? Because maybe they're really, part of their persona is that they're not going to be suckered by the other attorney and have to pay support. And they want those bragging rights to all of their friends. But when they pay for these other things that equal the same amount of money, they can save face with all of their flying monkeys, the other people that are influenced by them, and still come out, it comes out okay for both sides.
Yeah. And, and I think that's a big thing that's missing. Again, like we've talked about, right? Of really positioning to say, okay, what is important to this person? And how do we best position in a way that it's going to be well received? That's ultimately the question, I guess, in my mind, right? Related to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that.
Exactly.
So with that, any final thoughts of your favorite quote, any word of encouragement that you would love to leave our listeners with?
I would love for everyone to know that it can get better. I think it's so common to feel so stuck. I used to refer to it as feeling like stuck in quicksand, like the struggles would never be better, and they absolutely can be. And things can turn around in ways that are beyond your wildest imagination.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. So great we could have this conversation. I know there's more to come with what we are going to be working on together. And so I just appreciate this collaboration and conversation. And so if folks are looking to connect with you, why don't you just share with them quick the best way to do that?
Yeah, so my website is Melissa Kaltz, KALTMD.com. That's also my handle on all socials. And if they want to hop on my newsletter, my weekly newsletter, they can do that at narclesslife.com.
Goodness, there we have it. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Melissa. Appreciate it. And until next time, have a great day.
Thank you. You too.